Hello and welcome to my channel. In life, inevitably, we're all going to face difficult situations. Maybe it's something that you didn't plan for, it's got lots of complex parts, or maybe you just don't have the answer. But the most powerful weapon you do have is your faith. And guess what? God responds to it and He rewards it. We're going to talk about it in today's video. Let's go. Hey everybody, it's that Sunday School Girl of thatsundayschoolgirl.com. Welcome to the lesson for Sunday, October 20th. I pray that you've had a wonderful week. I have racked up a ton of airline miles, and this morning is no exception, as evident by the travel hat. And if you recognize this background here and the cute little girl right there, you know that I'm at Mom's house, which means I'm in Kansas City for an event. And I pray that you have something fun and wonderful planned this weekend with your family. And yes, that includes Sunday school. We do have a great lesson, and we're going to get into it in just a bit. But before we do, you know that I've got to say hello to a few special people, and those are the people who are new around here. Welcome. You have just joined the largest cyber community of Sunday school students on the World Wide Web. This is the most watched and the most thumbs up like review on YouTube for Sunday school lessons. So thank you for making me your partner in Sunday school study. There are going to be 4 ways that you can engage with this video while you're here. Everyone, do me a favor, and that's make sure that you've looked down below and you click the subscribe button. That's what officially gets you connected to this community. But there's a second step. You'll see a picture that looks like a bell. That's our notifications bell. It's going to send you an email every time there is content uploaded on this channel. And then if this video has been helpful to you in any way, if you've enjoyed it, at some point, everybody, just click that thumbs up like button for me. Doesn't cost you a thing just to say, hey, I like the video. That means good job. Amen. Would love to see more of this. Finally, I love to hear from you. So down below is your opportunity to leave comments, to leave feedback, or again, just say hello and tell me where you're from. But again, I'm so glad that you are all here. Earlier this week, I hope that you also follow not just this channel, but that you're connected to thatsundayschoolgirl.com. And if you're a social media user, that you are connected to me on Facebook specifically. I try to post there during the week, but this week, when I landed back in Dallas, I made a post and said, I marked up the lesson while I was on my first flight. Would you all like to kind of see my markup? And that's what I look at when I do my first read of the lesson and kind of see the questions and the way that I've planned out my study. And if you wanted that, I said, just let me know. And about 3 hours later, I went live on Facebook, and so many of you joined. I mean, hundreds of people have now seen that video. In fact, no, thousands have seen it. There are several hundred comments on it. And so that means that you found some value in it. If you would like to see more of that type of content or shares in that way, find a way to let me know that. Let me know it either on Facebook or in the comments below here, because that was really impromptu. But if it was valuable, I'd love to be able to not do that every week, but possibly do a little bit more of that in the coming weeks. So again, we marked up this lesson. We've taken a look at the things that we wanted to sort of seek out. And so this week's review, if you participated in that call, will answer a lot of that. So I hope that you're ready to get into this lesson. Again, this is one of those that is a bit familiar if you read, and these are New Testament stories, and it's a short passage, just 10 verses, but I hope that you have not skimmed over it, because as you saw in the markup, there was a lot to kind of dig out in it. So we're going to go through that. Look down below. The first line is the link for your TSSG notes. You can download those. I hope you have your Bibles, your commentaries, your pens, your handy dandy notebooks, because it's time for us to get into this lesson. Our lesson title is Faith Can Heal. The Bible basis is St. Luke chapter 7, verses 1 through 10. The Bible truth. Jesus demonstrates the power of faith through the example of the Centurion. Our memory verse is verse 7. And the lesson aim is that we will explore the faith of the Centurion who sought for healing for his servant, plan to demonstrate the same kind of faith in Jesus when we experience trouble, and rejoice in the power of God to reward the faithfulness of His people. We're taking a leap this week out of the Old Testament and into the New as we explore the synoptic gospel of St. Luke. Now, this is going to be both a story of healing and extreme faith. It is so interesting that I would record this lesson from home this week, from Mom's house, because when I think about the healing power of God and learning very early that God was a healer, I remember my brother as a small child suffered with seizures. I will never forget pulling up at the daycare one day and seeing the ambulance outside. And my father ran in, and inside they were there to take my brother. And he went to the hospital, stayed for several days, diagnosed as having seizures and everything that went along with that. And I just remember that there were all sorts of regimens they were putting him on, specifically medications. And I remember so distinctly that my mother did not like the way that the medications made my brother perform, the way they changed his personality. And I remember her calling for the people of God to pray, calling for the gift of faith. I remember my great-grandmother was living at the time, and my grandparents were living at the time, the saints from the church, our family all praying. And I will never forget the faith of my mother, who decided that this bottle, this is the prescription. I don't know that you can see it, but it's from 1984. This is the prescription that she was to, the instructions say, use once a day as directed, and to grind it up and put it on his food because he was too small to swallow it, but it was required. And again, the faith of a mother who says, I do not want my child on this type of medicine for life, and I believe in the healing power of God. And literally, she made the decision that he would take no more of these. And this bottle has sat in this house. This was 1984. It sat in this house for 30 plus years as a testament to the healing power of God. No, it was never anywhere dangerous that we could access it, but I knew that it still existed here, and I asked her for it this morning because, again, this is a visual that God can heal anything. And guess what? Today, he is healed, he is whole, he has not suffered with seizures since he was a kindergartner. God has blessed him. He is a man with a career, he is a pastor, he's a husband, he's got 4 wonderful children. So God can heal any situation. He can heal any disease. And we're going to see healing in this week's lesson. Again, we are in the book of Luke, which is written by Luke. Luke was a very smart man. His occupation, he was a physician. And so as you look at his writing, you'll note that he writes with great detail. Think about the detail that your doctor gives you in appointments or your diagnosis. They're looking and they're recording things that we may not pay attention to, but Luke picks up on all of those things. And he also writes, if you look at St. Luke chapter 1, you'll note that he writes from pretty much a first-hand account from persons who were with Jesus, who saw the miracles, who experienced life with Jesus. And again, we're discussing this week both healing and faith in this lesson. We are in chapter 7, verses 1 through 10. And we'll start with verse 1. Now, when he had ended all his sayings in the audience of the people, he entered into Capernaum. If you participated in the markup, you know that first of all, we wanted to know, who is he? He is Jesus. And all what sayings? What is it that he's just finished saying? What has he been teaching? Well, you just need to go back and peek at chapter 6. You don't have to read it all, but one thing that you'll note is that he has talked from verses 20 through 49. He's had a lot to say, and he's been preaching and teaching. Verse 17 of chapter 6 says he's in the plain. So the language, if you look at what he's talked about, it very much reads like the Sermon on the Mount. It's not identical language, but much of it mirrors the Sermon on the Mount, except he's in the plain this time, so call it Sermon on the Flatland. But we studied the Sermon on the Mount in July, so some of its context, again, is relevant in chapter 6 of St. Luke. And he enters Capernaum. What is Capernaum? It is a small fishing village near the Sea of Galilee. And this was now the headquarters city of Jesus since he had been kicked out of his own hometown. We know that from Matthew chapter 4:13. And people at home at this point are no longer able to see and to benefit from his ministry. But now we find him in Capernaum, his new headquarters city. And as we look across the New Testament, we see many instances of Jesus being in Capernaum when there are healings and miracles that take place. The lesson mentions an audience of people. Who are the people? Well, he's largely been teaching his disciples what it means to be disciples. It's more than just the lip service. It's more than just words. It's more than just identifying as a disciple. But literally, he talks about how you walk this thing out every single day, what it looks like in your action and in your deeds. And so here he shifts, and he's going to begin to teach them not just with a sermon or teaching points, but literally they're going to see firsthand an example of faith. Verse 2 says that there's a centurion, a certain centurion, and his servant was dear to him, and that servant was sick and ready to die. What is a centurion? Hopefully you identified that and looked it up. A centurion was a representative of the Roman occupation army, and they operated pretty much in Judea and Galilee. They would have typically commanded armies of soldiers of 80 to 100. Now, this was a prestigious position. They were typically well paid. Most centurions were Gentiles, and more than anything, they were oppressors of the Jewish people. They were technically enemies of Israel. That's pretty important to pick up here, and we're going to see why. And notice that this is a certain centurion, so he has no name. Centurions are mentioned in other places in Scripture. I give you references for those in the TSSG notes. And we see that there is a problem and there is an action. Here's the issue. The issue is that the centurion has a servant who is sick, and not just sick, a little cold, 3 days and a little chicken noodle soup. He is sick to the point that death is looming. He is sick and about to die. Now, when you go back to centurions and the role that they served in and the power and the authority they had, it was not uncommon that they abused this power and authority. And so sometimes I guess it would be easy to assume that they would have been perceived negatively. But here we see this centurion cast in a positive light. What do I mean? He is identified as someone who cares. He cares that his servant is sick. He cares that the servant is going to die. Why is that important? Because typically servants would have been considered property. So they would have been disposable. That one goes away, I get a new one. But this centurion is different. He cares for and he values his servant. And I made a note that this kind of compassion was not common, again, or expected. In verse 3, when he heard of Jesus, he sent unto him the elder of the Jews, beseeching him that they would come and heal his servant. This is the plea, the ask of the centurion. He is making a request. He, the centurion, is attempting to make contact with Jesus. And we pick up in verse 3 that he's heard of Jesus. Where has he heard from him? Heard about him. What has he heard about him? Well, clearly he's heard that people have been healed, have been made whole, that lives have been changed when Jesus gets involved. So he knows who Jesus is. He recognizes his identity. And clearly what he's heard has been impressive to him, to the point that he needs to reach out to Jesus. He needs to send for him. He believes that Jesus has the ability to turn the situation around for his servant who is sick. But he's got a hurdle. He is a centurion. He's a Gentile who's trying to get to a Jewish man. And I found this as a wow. A man who was an enemy of Israel, whose job was to oppress Jewish people, now needs something from a Jewish leader. So who does he send? He sends the elders of the Jews. Who are they? Why were they important? Why them? Well, there are a couple things that I see from my study. The first is that they were Jewish. And again, he sends people who would have had a common bond with Jesus. And actually, we're going to see that they go and, in a sense, they sort of increase the likelihood that even Jesus would give them audience and demonstrate that there was relationship with this man and that there would be a reason to respond to him in a favorable way. It was also common in Jewish culture to send someone in authority meant to, in essence, go for yourself. And so to send these elders was like going for himself. And for me, it was still interesting, though, that these Jewish elders would obey the request of a Roman centurion. But again, he is asking for Jesus to come. In verse 4, when these elders get to Jesus, they besought him instantly, and they're saying that this man is worthy for whom he should come. What's happening here? The elders go to Jesus, and notice it happens instantly. I made a note that things seem to happen quickly here. They don't drag their feet. And they immediately talk to Jesus, and they are making a case for the centurion. He's worthy. What does that mean? He deserves for you to come. The elders are seeking to convince Jesus that the centurion was one who deserved. In other words, he's a good guy. He's worthy, and they speak well about the centurion. They speak favorably about him. And note again that the centurion is not their leader, but they do think well of him. So our reputations matter. Our interactions with people do matter. In verse 5, here is their why. They start to give the reasons why the centurion is a good guy. He loves the nation. He's built a synagogue, a place of worship. And here was my personal thought. It means something when you have someone who will speak for you and speak well about you. Again, I think that's just a nugget that we can pick up from a leadership perspective. If you don't have someone somewhere that speaks well of you and thinks well of you, we've got some work to do. We should all have those people that we can identify. In verse 6, Jesus goes with them, and when he gets close to the house, the centurion now sends his friends to say to him, Lord, don't trouble yourself. I'm not worthy that you should even come under my roof. So we see a response. The elders have made this passionate plea for Jesus to come. The response is he goes with them. He honors their request. But as he gets close to the home of the centurion sends his friends out, and now he says, I'm not worthy. Tell Jesus, don't worry about it. I'm not worthy. He tries to stop Jesus from coming to the house. Now, here was a note that I made. He sent the Jewish elders to get Jesus, but he sends his friends to stop Jesus. And I kind of wondered why. Why the change? And as we're going to see, it had to do with whether he felt like he deserved it or whether he was worthy. And much of it had to do with the fact that he understood order and structure. We're going to see that in just a minute. In verse 7, Wherefore neither thought I myself worthy to come unto thee, but say in a word, and my servant shall be healed. This is the continuation. I should have grouped those together. He's saying that I'm not worthy for you to come into my house, but just the same, I wasn't worthy to come to you. Interesting, because the centurion spends time saying, I'm not worthy, and the elders have made a case that he was worthy. And again, why? What is that about? We've got this high-ranking Roman official who realizes that he needs something from Jesus. But his correct posture to get Jesus or to approach Jesus had to be one of humility. He had to display a posture of humility. But I thought about this as he's saying, I'm not worthy. How many things happen in our lives that make us feel like we are not worthy to come to Jesus? What types of things happen? What do we encounter? Times when we haven't been at our best and we have felt unworthy to come to Jesus. Verse 7, though, has the word but right in the middle of it. And anytime you see the word but, it is signaling a change. Watch for it, because something is going to be different on the other side of the but. The centurion says, I'm not worthy, but I do have confidence in you. Where do I see the centurion's confidence? He believes that Jesus has God-given authority to heal right from where he is. If he doesn't take another step, he doesn't have to do a thing except speak a word, and he believes that his servant can be healed. He doesn't even expressly say this, but he understands that the healing needed doesn't require Jesus to step foot in the house. He knows that Jesus is just that powerful. And then I looked at this. I love this because he says, say in a word. He's asking Jesus to simply speak one word. Again, he's asking Jesus for something, and that is to respond to a situation that concerns him. And even today, we can ask God, we can talk to God about situations that concern us. This leaps out at me. He had access to Jesus. We have access. And he felt strongly. He felt comfortable. He felt confident enough to ask. we can too. We can feel strongly and comfortable and confident. The Bible says to come boldly before the throne, and we can ask. And how many words does he ask Jesus for? He doesn't ask for a speech or a 2-hour sermon. He says, speak a word, and that is going to be powerful enough. Here's an aha for me. One word from the Lord is enough. Someone posted that song by Vicki Winans on my page this week. We need a word from the Lord, just one word. And guess what? It doesn't take Jesus long to respond or to move or to act and become part of the process. The centurion believed the words of Jesus had the power to heal. And just the same, we have to believe that he has the power to heal today. And this is another thing I noted, that the words of Jesus are enough to heal and sustain life. Remember, this servant was facing death. So both to heal and his words give life. Verse 8, the centurion now kind of relates to Jesus. He sees how, we're kind of alike, the roles that we have in our respective assignments. Here's how I understand that you have that kind of power. He's using an analogy. We know that from the word also. That kind of signals that we're going to get an analogy. And what he does is he uses his role in the Roman army to talk about the role of Jesus and the Father, to compare them and to say, this is how I understand how this works. You're a man and I'm a man. I'm set under the Roman authority. You're set under the authority of your father. In other words, we both have a boss. We both have a manager. I have people under me who report to me. They do what I say do. They're soldiers. And you have your word, and you tell your word what to do. You direct your word just like I direct soldiers. And guess what? My soldiers do what I say. Your word does what you tell it to do. When the centurion gave orders, it was the equivalent of orders coming directly from Caesar. Just the same, he's saying to Jesus that I understand that just like when I speak, it's as good as Caesar speaking. When you speak, your Father is immediately notified, and the word works because you have the authority of your Father. So why was it important for the centurion to make this kind of connection? Again, this analogy was not simply about human activity. It was more about him expressing his confidence in the strength of the words of Jesus. And the words of Jesus, again, they're just like the men in his army. When you speak them, when you direct them, they do just what you say they need to do. Isaiah 55:11 says, so shall the word be that goeth forth out of my mouth. It shall not return to me void, but it accomplishes that which I please, and it shall prosper in the thing which I send it. The word of the Lord works. Here's the bottom line. Just like he represented the authority of Caesar, he knew that Jesus represented the authority of God. Verses 9 and 10. When Jesus heard these things, he marveled at them, and he turns and he says to the people that followed him, I say unto you, I have not found so great a faith, no, not in Israel. Jesus responds to the centurion. Look for the action words here. He marveled, he turned, and he speaks. He marvels, he turns, and he speaks. What does to marvel mean? It means he is completely wowed at kind of the mental process and the level of faith that the centurion has gone through. He is surprised. Why? Because the centurion gets it. Like, he's encountered a lot of people who are giving him pushback at this point, but here is a man who's a Gentile and he gets it. This centurion is not an ordinary person of faith. Here was an aha for me. That faith has turned up in an unlikely place from an unlikely person. It showed up with someone who was positioned as an enemy. And you know what? Faith can show up in unlikely places. And I made a note because this sort of leapt out to me in terms of current events in my city of Dallas, where we saw interactions where faith kind of turned up in an unlikely place. And guess what? There was a lot of flack and feedback that's come along with that, but it only goes to show us that we don't know where that moment of faith will show up, but it can show up in an unlikely place. St. Luke chapter 6 and 27 says, love your enemies, do good to those that hate you. That's what Jesus taught. And here's this man that was supposed to be an enemy, and yet you have to love an enemy and do good. So Jesus turns around and he begins to address the onlookers. Remember, he's been teaching in front of an audience in verse 1. These people are still present. They've seen all of this happen. And Jesus turns and he says to the people, I've seen faith before, but I've never seen faith like this before. No, not in Israel. Why was it important to call out Israel? Because Israel was the covenant land of the Jews. So even in the covenant land, I've never seen faith like I've just seen from this Gentile. Here was an aha for me. Though worthiness was made an issue, like when the centurion talked to the elders and even when he sent his friends out, he was so focused on being worthy, but that never comes up with Jesus. He never even addresses whether the centurion was worthy. What he does is responds to his faith. Last verse is verse 10. And they that were sent returned to the house and found the servant whole that had been sick. They returned to the house. Who is they? They are those who were sent out to tell Jesus don't come. The friends, I think, from verse 6. They returned home, and that servant who was sick and about to die is now healed. The servant is made whole. Now, what we don't see in here is any overt action on the part of Jesus. We don't get to see him interact with the servant. There is no laying hands. He doesn't talk directly to the servant. All we see between verses 9 and 10 is we see extreme faith and we find a healed servant. How does he heal? We don't know, but we celebrate the faith that brought healing to this servant. And even today, as so many of us face difficult situations, it's not about having all of the answers, but it's always about supplying the faith that is needed to get you through the journey. God has everything in control. The only thing he asks for is for us to trust him and supply the faith that is needed to get us through. That's the lesson for this week. I have several key learnings. I want to share them with you, and then I'm going to get out of your hair and we can all enjoy the weekend. First, healing is possible. In whatever area you need healing, whether you're sick, whether you've got a really tough situation where it seems like you can't figure things out, God can heal any situation. There is nothing too hard for God. Let me give a disclaimer. I am not suggesting that you go and throw out all of your medications. Listen to your doctors, but there are going to be some things that you will come up on, and your faith is going to speak louder than anything else. When you supply the faith, you've got to know that God can. And he's bigger than this. He's bigger than the bottles. He's bigger than diagnosis. God can heal, and he can heal anything. Next, people can still hear about Jesus. Remember, the centurion had heard about Jesus. He hadn't interacted with him. But even today, people still need to hear about Jesus. That's why our testimony is important. We share the testimony, and we're overcome by our testimony in the blood of the Lamb, says Revelation. But more importantly, others are encouraged by our testimonies of faith. And as we share our faith, the faith of others is built, and they hear about Jesus as we share. Next, we may be out of options when we've done everything that we think we can do humanly, but guess what? God is never out of options, and we are never without our hope. We are never without the option to turn to God and ask for his help. And guess what? We are so guilty of trying to exhaust everything that we know before we engage him, but we don't have to wait until it's too late. You don't have to wait until you come to the end of your rope. You can access him. You can reach him. You can touch him now. And we can go to Jesus for ourselves. We don't have to send the elders. We don't have to go see the elders. We don't have to go through our friends. We have access to him on our own. And guess what? There are no limits in God. There is nothing that disqualifies us from reaching out to Jesus. Again, there is this theme and conversation of worthiness and what we have to do. We don't have to do anything except go to him. So we don't need to rehearse with him. And the elders laid out all these things the centurion did. That would be like us saying, well, God, I go to church every week, and, I serve on this ministry, and I do this, and this is what I did last week, and I give my tithe, and I give my offering. We don't have to run a list that gives qualification to have access to Jesus. Why? Because we don't earn favor with God. We never have to prove our worthiness. We should keep a right view of our relationship with God. Again, there's nothing that makes us worthy, but we should always submit to him in humility. It doesn't matter how much you do or how much you give, but this is more about the theme of this quarter is His grace. His grace is what gives us the access to approach Him. There may be times that we have to humble ourselves for the benefit of another. And I see that so clearly. This centurion humbled himself, and this wasn't even for him. It was for another person. And quite frankly, his society said that person was property. They were disposable. But for the benefit of another, he humbled himself. A couple of leadership nuggets here. You can, if you're a manager, if you're a supervisor, a Sunday school teacher, a pastor, you can have a good relationship with the people who report to you, the people who fall under you from a reporting structure. You can have a good relationship, and guess what? You can care about those people too. I think so often managerial relationships are adversarial, but they don't have to be. And it's always my prayer, even when I go into new roles and when I'm praying for people who are going to get new jobs, I don't just pray for jobs. One of the things I ask God for is give that person the right job with the right manager, the right relationship, the right pay, the right hours, everything. You can have a good relationship with management. It is possible. And here's the thing, as leaders, managers, compassion has to exist in us. It's compassion that will cause us, in fact, it should cause us to move on the behalf of others when we see they are hurting. And the centurion does this. He sees a man who is hurting, who is sick, who's about to die, and he moves on his behalf. Couple more. It is wonderful to have people who will speak for you. So again, just a leadership nugget as you're building the people who are around you. We all need mentors. We all need people who inspire us. We need people, though, who will speak for us. You need someone who will speak well of you. That is important as you build kind of the team around you for your own personal success. Next, one word from the Lord is enough. That is enough to change any situation. And God responds to our faith. So question for you as we'll wrap up. What is it that you're going to do that will display a level of faith that will cause the Lord to marvel and just say, wow, that level of faith is fantastic. That is our lesson for this week. Of course, I am hopeful that there were nuggets that you got out of the lesson and that you'll share those with me down below. And I want you to know, again, I know that some of you who are watching this video are facing some really tough situations. And so I pray even now for those of you who need healing in your body, that God will be the God that He is. The Bible tells us that He is a healer and that He has every capability to heal every disease, every sickness, every attack of the enemy in your body. So as you supply the faith, I thank God even now that He is touching your body. He's going into places that the doctors can't see. He's going in and He's changing and rearranging and moving things around and bringing wholeness and order to your body in Jesus' name. I thank you now, God, that you're giving testimony of healing. Thank you for testimony and confirmation even by medical report. I thank you that someone even right now who watches this video will go back to the doctor and the report is going to be different than the last time that they went. I am grateful for those of you who have been with me in study this week, and I pray that you will be blessed as you study this lesson, blessed as you go forth in your classes this week. That's all that I have. I'll see you in Sunday school. Bye, everybody.